announcing charges in a very significant human trafficking case involving massage parlors. I want to start by letting trafficking victims know that we want you to come forward. You're not to blame for what is being done to you, and my office and the Farmington Hills Police Department and our entire human trafficking section and our task force want to help you, and want to keep you safe. In November, our office brought together more than 300 law enforcement health professionals, mental health professionals, and law enforcement. Sorry, one second. This is why they told me I needed to practice this, and I didn't. For a human trafficking training. This training focused attention on the prevalence of trafficking in our communities and trained officers to recognize the vast majority of women involved in the sex trade are victims, not criminals. They're not the people we should be arresting, and they're victims and witnesses, and above all, people who need our help. It's gratifying to see how quickly that training has resulted in new investigations and arrests, and hopefully the rescue of many victims, but it's also very jarring. Today we're here because the Farmington Hills Police, along with the Human Trafficking Task Force partners, including the Oakland County Sheriff's Department and the Westland Police, have made human trafficking a top priority and dedicated the resources needed to complete this intensive investigation. Together, we are combating human trafficking with an urgency previously never seen in the state of Michigan. Thanks to the good work of the task force and our partner agencies, our office is charging Sue Wan with 2 counts of human trafficking and 1 count of keeping a house of prostitution. It's important to remember these charges are just allegations, and the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Merely listing these charges does not adequately convey the scale of abuse victims suffered in this case. The victims we've identified so far are 4 women. They're immigrants and appear to have been held as virtual prisoners. In interviews with Care House investigators, these women told of appalling living conditions. They were forced to live inside the massage parlor, working 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., providing massages to what we believe to be an almost entirely male clientele. They were apparently, they did not have access to transportation, friends or family, or medical care. They claimed they received no or minimal payment for their work. Again, I do want to state that these charges are just allegations, and the defendant has a right, as presumed to innocent until proven guilty. It's shocking to think of this kind of abuse that's taking place in our county, but the sad reality is too many vulnerable people, especially women, are exploited and abused by traffickers in places close to home. While there is evidence the victims have been forced to participate in sex work, Chief Piggott will discuss the details of the investigation. This case also highlights the problem of labor trafficking, which is effectively slavery. Our Human Trafficking Task Force is working collaboratively with law enforcement agencies across Oakland County to combat trafficking in all its forms. We're holding traffickers accountable and providing victims an opportunity to break free from these abusive situations. I want to commend the work of Cindy Brown. She's our lead of the trafficking unit, and her entire unit for the work that they did and bringing this training to law enforcement. We've seen such a major change in the way that we deal with these cases since the training took place. And finally, I want to just say to the customers of these illicit massage parlors that a sexual massage may seem like a victimless crime or a consensual transactional act, but for trafficking victims, they do not have the ability to consent. It is not a victimless crime. Take responsibility for how your actions may enable trafficking and the abuse of vulnerable women. And if that's not enough to make you change or reconsider, know that we will and we can and we will prosecute those who do business with sex traffickers. These are criminal enterprises, and the customers are part of that problem. My office and the task force are working hard to combat trafficking, but we also need the help of the community to find victims and to deny traffickers the economic incentive to exploit vulnerable people. I do want to particularly stress what an amazing job the Farmington Hills Police Department has done and the entire task force. But what this police department is doing is keeping their community safe. And up until recently, we were treating these victims like they were they should be prosecuted, or this was just their choice. And we know the data shows all over the country, all over the state, and even in this county, that they are not. They are victims. Chief Piggott.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Prosecutor McDonald, for hosting this and talking about this very intensive investigation. Just to give some overall background, Farmington Hills Police Department routinely receives complaints about potentially illicit massages going on within the city, and those investigations are often assigned to our Directed Patrol Unit. So to introduce some of the people that I have with me today is Assistant Chief Brian Moore, Lieutenant Dominic Loria, who oversees our Investigative Bureau, and Sergeant Larry Hernandez, who supervises our Directed Patrol Unit, who actually started this investigation and saw it all the way through. Going back to October of 2024, our investigations started looking into possible illicit locations within the city and realizing that we needed additional training when it came to human trafficking investigations. Our partnership between administration and the Farmington Hills Police Department and the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office started talking about what kind of training was available to our staffs. To the credit of Prosecutor McDonald and Section Leader Brown, a course that has already been described was put on by the Prosecutor's Office, which detailed how to conduct these investigations thoroughly and to set them up for successful prosecutions. Following that training, Sergeant Hernandez immediately brought that knowledge back to our police department and started an investigation into an illicit massage parlor located at 13 Mile and Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. The information gleaned from that investigation was shared within our Investigative Bureau and through field investigation, surveillance operations, digital forensic investigative techniques, and our crime data analyst brought together information to identify a primary suspect in this human trafficking criminal organization. That investigation led to locations involving businesses, residences outside of Farmington Hills, which were identified to be in Highland Township, Commerce Township, Westland, and residences in Livonia. Based on that information, we joined fellow law enforcement partners throughout the region to start doing investigations into those communities as well. That investigation lasted just under 3 months from beginning to end, with the conclusion of it coming last week, where our police department, including the Oakland County Sheriff's Department Special Investigative Unit, the Westland Police Department Special Investigation Unit, all conducting numerous search warrants simultaneously in those locations. As a result, the primary suspect was identified and arrested. 4 survivors were rescued from 3 separate locations. Those survivors were brought to Common Ground, Oakland County's mental health facility, where they were given the opportunity to receive victim services. Just to show the scope of this investigation, our investigators have identified homes, vehicles, and commercial real estate that appeared to have been paid for through this ongoing illicit and exploitive criminal enterprise. We've recovered over $140,000 in U.S. currency from a safety deposit box associated with the suspect. This investigation was submitted to the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office for review, and we are thankful that they issued the charges as described by the prosecutor earlier. In closing, these illicit activities were taking place in businesses and commercial districts that were open to the public, often legitimate business surrounding them. What we would ask is residents or business owners that are operating in these areas is to report unusual business activity. In most cases, these were businesses that operate with inconsistent business hours. There's no signage on these businesses. They black out their windows, they lock their doors to conceal what is going on inside. Generally, it's an all-male clientele, and you should not be seeing employees coming or going, which is why we see these women who are trapped in these businesses all day. The Farmington Hills Police Department is committed to investigate these incidences, and we will bring all of our investigative resources to bear in an effort to eliminate these activities, not only from our city, but any location that supports these criminal enterprises. Again, thank you for all the work that the prosecutor's office did to help us build these cases, and we are hopeful of successful prosecutions for these. Thank you.
Questions? Any questions?
I'm sorry, prosecutor.
That's
has
okay.
your investigation led to any other areas outside, or like obviously Farmington Hills, but where else in Oakland County? And are there any operations that this person is affiliated with, maybe even in Wayne County or some other counties?
I can't speak to this particular defendant, but as Chief Piggott outlined, there are several massage parlors throughout the county and throughout the state, but definitely throughout the county. And again, it is the charges here are so important, and it's not just because we want to hold just this defendant accountable. This is a whole new way of looking at what goes on in these massage parlors. These women are not predators. They shouldn't be prosecuted. And simply because somebody says, yes, I want to be here, or this is my choice, what we've learned is that is just not true, and that answer just can't be taken with no further investigation. When somebody has no access to transportation, no money, in this case, new to this country, and they have no place to live except the massage parlor, and they're working hours 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. This is not a victimless crime, and this is just the beginning, because the task force is made up of representatives from law enforcement all over the county, and all of them are in the process at this moment of looking at those places as well.
Is this a situation where you can go after the clientele, the customers?
Absolutely. It's against the law. It's prostitution. That's the charge. And for reasons that I can't speak to, that's just not something that is normally done. And that's what we intend to do. It is not victimless. And we need to, first of all, create awareness about what's going on. And second, hold people accountable.
You mentioned that these are new residents or new to America, foreigners, for a better term. Can you talk about their status?
I did not say foreigners. That's okay. We know that in this case, these women were brought from China. I can't elaborate right now on their legal status.
Is there a risk here that they could be victimized again and be sent back to China now that they're in the system?
Absolutely. I'm not sure. They're vulnerable regardless, even if they're not sent back to their country. I think fearing enforcement and being apprehended or detained makes it harder for them to report when they're victims. But this is the situation in this case. I'm not suggesting that all massage parlors have victims that are from different countries. But in this case, I think it's reasonable to assume that was part of the barrier.
And the defendant in this case, an American citizen, or you know?
I can't speak to that.
Yes,
She is.
She was legally here.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
I do think it's important to note, though, that the victims in this case do not speak English, and that's yet another barrier to seeking help and protection.
I don't want to get into the investigation, but were they brought here, from your understanding, for this purpose?
I'm gonna let Chief Piggott answer that question.
So a lot of that part of the investigation is still ongoing. So, we're fortunate that in this county that we have good resources that we can give to victims of these types of crimes. So originally, the women were brought to Common Ground and forensic interviews were taking place. So, they're not being brought to the police department, so there's less of a stigma of, like, could I be charged with an offense? Like, this is more of a civil process. We took them, we set them up with victim resources. We had translators come in to go over the facts of how they were working. And so based off of that investigation and what they reported to us, which was in line with what our investigation was showing, which is kind of what the talking point before. Like, these women did not leave the places where they were providing the massages. So that's where the boots on the ground investigation match up with our digital evidence recovery to show where are people, how long are they there, are we seeing people come and going. So that's the kind of case that Sergeant Hernandez put together, which was outstanding because it made the timelines perfect. We knew where she was going, we knew what businesses she was operating, where we believed that these victims would be, and that all came together perfectly. So this was an outstanding investigation right from the very beginning, which was supported by the training, the resources that we have. And so as a jumping off point for something involving human trafficking, I think this is a great case to show how investigative methods and techniques can come together, work with other cities, other counties even, and work with our assistants, or with our, them assisting us with all the investigative work to really come to this point right now. And still, I mean, the investigation is still ongoing. So, I mean, there's still financial crimes that we're still looking into. But for this part, we're happy that we were able to rescue 4 women and get them out of that environment. And now we have time to sit back and really delve even deeper and see where else this can grow.
And just as a reminder, these are allegations. The defendant has a right. She's presumed innocent until proven guilty. But I just want to, I think, make sure that I say this. Trafficking, whether it be labor, for labor, in this case, there's elements of both. There was a promise for work once they came to this country. Sex trafficking, it all depends on one critical thing, a vulnerable victim. Now, you can be vulnerable because of your age, you can be vulnerable because of a substance abuse issue, you can be vulnerable because you're trying to flee an abusive situation, and you can be vulnerable because you are in a different country, you don't speak the language, and you were promised work, and you came here for that, and you now have zero resources. So that is the nature of trafficking. There are vulnerable victims that the trafficker uses and exploits for their own economic gain.
Is there any evidence that this was part of a larger criminal conspiracy, like a gang or something? Because sometimes people are sent here as part of a larger criminal enterprise, and their families may be threatened back from their home country with things. Is there any evidence that can lead to that, like a larger criminal enterprise behind this?
I refer to, we're still investigating, so it's very possible that that information gleaned from the survivors will identify additional targets. So right now, it's still an active investigation, more may come, but again, we're talking about this particular case without getting too far over our skis on what might come down the road. But there's certainly, like I said, when we talk about the scope of the number of business locations, the number of residences, and the amount of money that we're seizing would certainly lead us to believe that there's a potential that it could expand even further.
And it's rampant, and until this point, there hasn't really even been a meaningful effort to hide what is going on. There are websites where this is being advertised. Human trafficking, sex work is being advertised, and they are open to anybody. So up until now, there hasn't been a real fear that someone would be prosecuted. And that's why we're standing here, to create awareness and help the public understand that this is a criminal activity. All right, thank you so much.
Oh, just one last question. For
Yes.
other victims out there, potential victims, who or where should they call? Burlington Hills Police Department or?
We have several resources. I know absolutely your law enforcement agency, but Common Ground, I can provide numbers for you so you can include it in your stories, and our human trafficking task force. But there are national helplines and there are local resources